everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. I get it. You're trying to boost your English skills, but sometimes it feels like you're hitting a wall.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone there. It's so common to feel stuck at a certain level and wonder why you're not making more progress.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We've got this really insightful uh, podcast script that breaks down some of the most common roadblocks people face when learning English.
Yeah, it's almost like we've got a roadmap to fluency right here in our hands.
Totally. So let's dive right in and see what kind of treasures we can uncover. The first thing that really jumped out at me from this script was the emphasis on consistency.
Yeah, they really hammer that point home, don't they?
They do, and I think it's so crucial. They use this great analogy comparing language learning to building muscle.
Right. You wouldn't expect to get ripped by just going to the gym once a month, would you?
Definitely not. It's about those regular workouts, even if they're short, that really add up over time.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to language learning. Those little bursts of daily practice, even if it's just 15 minutes, make a much bigger impact than sporadic marathon study sessions.
So it's more about creating a habit than cramming, right?
Yeah, consistency is key. That's what builds those strong neural pathways in your brain, just like lifting weights builds muscle.
So how does that actually work with language? I mean, we're not exactly lifting dumbbells with our tongues.
Well, think of it this way. Every time you engage with English, whether you're reading, listening, speaking, or writing, you're giving your brain a workout. You're activating those language centers and strengthening the connections.
So it's all about those repeated actions, those consistent efforts that solidify those connections.
Precisely. And the script also talks about this idea of language acquisition happening in layers, which I think is a really helpful way to visualize it.
Layers. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Imagine you're building a house. You start with the foundation, then the walls, then the roof, and finally all the finishing touches. It's a step-by-step process.
And language acquisition works the same way.
Exactly. You start with the basics, vocabulary, grammar, then you gradually layer on more complex structures, idioms, cultural nuances, and so on.
And that consistent exposure helps those layers solidify over time.
Precisely. It's like each layer needs time to set before you can build on top of it.
Okay, so we've established that consistency is key. But there's another big roadblock that the script tackles that I think a lot of language learners struggle with. And that's relying too much on translation.
Yes. The translation crutch. We've all been there. It's so tempting to fall back on our native language when we're trying to express ourselves in English.
Totally. But the script argues that this can actually hinder your progress.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
When you're constantly translating, you're not allowing your brain to form those direct connections between the concept and the English word or phrase.
So instead of thinking apple, you're thinking the fruit that is red and round and grows on trees in your native language and then trying to translate that into English.
Exactly. It's like taking a detour every time you want to say something. It slows you down and prevents you from developing that natural flow.
So how do we break free from this translation habit? I know the script offers some practical advice on this.
Yeah, they suggest starting small. Instead of trying to translate complex sentences, focus on mastering everyday phrases.
Like, good morning, how are you? Can I have a coffee, please? That sort of thing.
Exactly. Those seemingly simple phrases are actually the building blocks of fluency. And as you get comfortable with them, you can start stringing them together to form more complex sentences without relying on translation.
It's like learning your scales before tackling a concerto.
Precisely. You need to build that solid foundation first.
And here's another great tip from the script. If you encounter a word you don't know, try describing it instead of immediately reaching for your dictionary.
Oh, I love that one. It forces you to be creative and to think in English.
So instead of saying, I need the thing you use to open a bottle, you could say, I need the metal thingy with the twisty part.
Exactly. It might not be perfect, but it gets your message across. And in the process, you're strengthening those neural pathways and building your fluency.
It's almost like a game, right? Trying to find ways to express yourself with the vocabulary you already have.
Yeah, exactly. It's challenging, but it's also fun and incredibly effective. And as you continue to learn, those gaps in your vocabulary will become smaller and smaller.
That's encouraging. Okay, so we've talked about consistency and ditching the translation crutch. Now, the script also talks about the importance of active engagement, which is something I've been hearing a lot about lately.
Yeah, it's a hot topic in the language learning world these days. And for good reason, simply listening to podcasts or watching movies isn't enough.
You need to be more proactive, right?
Absolutely. It's about moving from being a passive observer to an active participant.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, it could involve taking notes while you listen to a podcast, repeating phrases out loud, shattering the speaker.
Shadowing. What's that?
It's a technique where you try to mimic the speaker as closely as possible, almost like you're their shadow. You listen to a phrase and then repeat it immediately, paying attention to their pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm.
Wow, that sounds challenging, but really effective.
It is, and it's a fantastic way to improve your speaking skills and get a feel for the natural flow of the language.
So it's about actively engaging with the material rather than just passively consuming it.
Exactly. When you're actively engaged, your brain is processing the information more deeply. You're making connections, analyzing and internalizing the language in a much more meaningful way.
It's like the difference between watching a cooking show and actually getting in the kitchen and trying out a recipe.
Precisely. The more you actively engage with the language, the more it becomes a part of you and the faster you'll see those fluency gains.
Okay, so we've covered consistency, avoiding translation, and active engagement. Those are already 3 incredibly valuable insights. Are there any other key takeaways from this script that you think would be helpful for our listener to focus on?
There are, and I think we can delve into those in our next segment. We've laid a great foundation so far, and now it's time to build upon it.
Excellent. I'm ready to keep digging into this language learning treasure map. We'll be back soon for part 2 of this deep dive, so stay tuned. All right, we're back for more of this deep dive into what's holding you back in English.
Yeah, and something that really resonated with me in this script was the idea that you're putting in effort but not seeing the results you want.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like I'm spinning my wheels.
Yeah.
I'm putting in the time, but I'm not really moving forward.
Well, the script has a really interesting take on this. They talk about the importance of setting clear, achievable goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like saying I want to be healthy without any specific plan for diet or exercise. It's just too vague.
Exactly. And without that clear direction, it's easy to lose motivation and momentum.
So what do they suggest instead?
They recommend using the SMART method for setting language learning goals.
Okay. I've heard of SMART goals, but remind me what that stands for again.
Sure. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right? So instead of just saying, I want to improve my English, I might say something like, I want to be able to have a 10-minute conversation about my hobbies in English within 3 months.
Perfect example. That's a SMART goal. It's specific, you can measure your progress, it's achievable, it's relevant to your interests, and it has a clear time frame.
I see how breaking it down like that makes it much less daunting and more actionable.
Exactly. It gives you something concrete to work towards.
But even with a clear goal, I think a lot of us struggle with the fear of making mistakes. I know I do. Sometimes I get so worried about messing up that I avoid speaking altogether.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge hurdle for many language learners. But you know what? The script actually argues that mistakes are not only inevitable, but they're actually essential for learning.
That's kind of a mind shift, isn't it?
It is, and it's backed by neuroscience. When we make a mistake and then receive feedback or even just realize it ourselves, it creates a stronger neural pathway in our brains.
So those moments where I cringe because I said something wrong are actually helping me learn.
Exactly. Your brain is like, okay, that didn't work. Let's adjust and try again. It's all part of the process.
But it's still hard to embrace those mistakes in the moment.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to say mistakes are good, but it's harder to actually feel that way when you're the one making them.
Totally. I get it. And that's where the script suggests finding a language partner or joining a speaking group.
So you're surrounded by people who are in the same boat, who are all learning and making mistakes together.
Exactly. It creates a safe space where you can practice without the pressure of being perfect.
And you can learn from each other's mistakes, too.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier the idea of recording yourself speaking. Have you ever tried that?
I have a few times. It's always a bit awkward listening to myself, but it's also really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's a great way to become more aware of your own speech patterns and to identify areas where you can improve.
Like maybe I realize I'm using the wrong tense or my pronunciation is off.
Exactly. And you can track your progress over time, which can be really motivating.
Okay, so we've covered setting SMART goals and reframing our attitude towards mistakes. Is there anything else in this script that addresses the why isn't my English improving question?
There is, and this one might surprise you. The script actually cautions against focusing too much on grammar, at least in the early stages.
Wait, what isn't grammar like the foundation of language?
It is, but here's the thing. If you get too bogged down in grammar rules, you can lose sight of the bigger picture, which is communication.
So you're saying it's more important to just get out there and speak, even if you make a few grammar mistakes along the way.
Exactly. Fluency comes from practice, not perfection. Think of it like learning to play an instrument. If you spend all your time studying music theory but you never actually play, you're not going to make much progress.
Right. You need that hands-on experience.
And the same goes for language learning. Grammar is important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The key is to find a balance.
So it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's okay to not know every grammar rule perfectly. And it's okay to focus on just getting your message across.
Exactly. And you know what? The more you practice, the more those grammar rules will start to fall into place naturally.
This is really giving me a new perspective on how to approach language learning. I feel like I've been so focused on getting everything perfect that I've been holding myself back.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do here with this deep dive. Help you break through those barriers and unlock your fluency potential.
Well, I'm definitely feeling inspired to loosen up a bit and just focus on communicating. So what's next on this language learning treasure map? Is there anything else we need to uncover?
There's one more crucial element that we haven't talked about yet, and that's immersion.
Immersion. That sounds intriguing. I can't wait to hear what that's all about. We'll be right back for the final part of this deep dive. Okay, we're back for the final part of this deep dive. And I'm really curious to hear more about this idea of immersion. You know, I've always thought of it as something you can only experience if you actually live in an English-speaking country.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. But the truth is, you can create an immersive environment for yourself anywhere in the world.
Really? Yeah. So I don't need to pack my bags and book a plane ticket.
Nope, not at all. It's all about making conscious choices to surround yourself with the language in a way that feels natural and enjoyable.
Okay, so where do I even begin? What are some practical steps I can take to create that immersive experience without actually traveling?
One of the easiest and most enjoyable ways is through media. Think about all the amazing English language content out there. Movies, TV shows, music podcasts, YouTube channels. The list goes on and on.
So instead of watching that latest Netflix series with subtitles in my native language, I could try watching it with English subtitles or even no subtitles at all.
Exactly. And the great thing about this is that it doesn't feel like work. You're entertaining yourself while simultaneously immersing yourself in the language.
It's like sneaking in a workout while you're binging your favorite show.
Precisely. And as you engage with this content, your brain is picking up new vocabulary, absorbing different accents and pronunciation patterns, and even getting a feel for the cultural nuances of the language.
It's like you're passively learning without even realizing it.
Well, it's not entirely passive. Your brain is actively making connections and absorbing all those subtle details that make a language come alive.
Okay, so media is one way. What else?
Another surprisingly effective strategy is to change the language settings on all your devices, your phone, your computer, your tablet, your social media accounts. Make English the default language.
Yeah, I've actually tried that before.
Yeah.
And it was amazing how quickly I adapted. It was a little weird at first, but after a while it became second nature.
And think about how often you interact with your devices throughout the day. It's constant micro immersion.
That's true. Every notification, every email, every time you check the news, you're getting a little dose of English.
Exactly. And speaking of social media, that's another great avenue for immersion. Join Facebook groups related to your interests. Participate in Twitter chats. Follow Instagram accounts that inspire you.
It's a way to connect with native speakers and other learners from all over the world.
And to practice your reading and writing in a real-world context.
You mentioned earlier the idea of finding a language partner, someone you could practice speaking with. Can you find those online too?
Absolutely. There are tons of websites and apps that connect language learners for conversation exchange. You can find someone who's learning your native language and you can swap conversation time.
So you both benefit. It's a win-win.
Exactly. And you might even make some new friends along the way.
That's awesome.
Oh.
Okay, so we've talked about media devices and social media, but what about creating an immersive environment at home?
That's a great idea. And it doesn't have to be anything drastic. You can start by labeling objects around your house with their English names. Listen to English radio while you cook. Or try having English-only dinners with your family or roommates.
English-only dinners. That sounds like a fun challenge.
It is. And it forces you to think on your feet and practice speaking spontaneously.
And don't forget about the power of self-talk.
Ah, yes. Talking to yourself in English might feel silly at first, but it's a great way to get comfortable with the language and to practice forming sentences without fear of judgment.
You know what? I actually do that all the time. I narrate my day. Rehearse conversations in my head, even have pretend arguments in English.
It's like giving yourself a private language lesson.
Exactly. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what immersion really means and how I can make it a part of my everyday life.
And that's exactly what we were hoping for. Remember, immersion is a journey, not a destination. It's about those small, consistent choices that gradually bring you closer to fluency. So keep experimenting, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep having fun with the language.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you the tools and inspiration to take your English to the next level. Keep practicing, keep pushing yourself, and never give up on your language learning goals.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Until next time, keep practicing and stay confident.